is a full professor at the Department of Human and Molecular Genetics and Biochemistry and Vice Dean at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine in Tel Aviv University. She was born in Canada, raised in the US, and received her undergrad degree from the Washington University in St. Louis. Then she went to perform her PhD at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, and then she performed a postdoctoral fellowship at the NIH. Karen joined Tel Aviv University in 1996, and she worked at the Center of Discovery of Disease and Genes. Karen is a great friend of BioBroad. We know her personally in the last 5 years, maybe more. She is a great advocate of BioBroad, and she is doing her best to try to help our members to get back to Israel, find jobs in Tel Aviv University, but not only in Tel Aviv University, she's also trying to help them to find jobs in other universities and also in the academia. So as I said before, it's a great pleasure to have Karen today with us, and I will let her take it from here. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And let me start out by saying that BioBroad is amazing. I think back, maybe, when did you start? A couple, maybe 5, 6 years ago. Don't remember the exact date. And it's a completely different type of outlook in looking for a position in Israel. I think the pre-BioBroad and the post-BioBroad days. So really my congratulations to you. So what I wanted to do in the next hour or so is, other than entertain questions, is tell you about the Sackler Faculty of Medicine at Tel Aviv University and go through some of the issues that are involved in looking for a position. And we'll see how it goes. Depending also on your questions, feel free to ask questions during, and we'll also have some time, I will hopefully leave some time at the end to answer questions. So it's really nice to do this. I love Tel Aviv University and the faculty. I think those of you who know me know that I've had a very, I think, productive and successful 18 years at Tel Aviv. And so whatever I can do to help people either come to Tel Aviv, or of course, unfortunately, we can't absorb everyone. And my goal really, as Gil said, is to see that those who are qualified to get a faculty position, and this is really what they should be doing, that they'll find that position in Israel. So what's pictured here in the first slide is actually the entrance to the Sackler Faculty of Medicine. You can see that building behind that structure. And the entrance is a library. I don't know how many of you go to libraries anymore, but we actually have a very productive library. Students spend a lot of time studying there. And behind that is the 10 floors of the Sackler School of Medicine. And let me go and explain further what I'm talking about when I talk about the school versus the rest of the faculty. Okay, so first let me start out by telling you what the mission of the Sackler Faculty of Medicine is. Our goal is to educate medical, dental, and graduate and health professional students with the highest professional and intellectual standards, and to prepare clinicians, health professionals, and researchers to practice medicine and biomedical research for the health and care of the public. And of course, I emphasize the educate and biomedical research because this is really the part that all of you who are watching this come in. This is intricately tied to the goals of the research, the basic understanding of human pathophysiology, and the improvement of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of disease. And again, I emphasize the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of disease because we are a medical school. And of course, our ultimate goal, while most of us are doing basic research, is to apply that basic research toward health and medicine. So let me give you a little bit of background about Tel Aviv University. We have about 30,000 students enrolled. 14,000 of those are graduate students, both master's and PhD students. We have about 1,000 senior faculty members. And in addition to that, and that becomes relevant if you're at the medical school, we have about 1,400 affiliated faculty who are physicians. They actually are employed by the hospitals and their laboratories are in the hospitals, but they have an academic affiliation with Tel Aviv University, and they of course serve as our teachers. We have about 130 research institutes and centers. I'll tell you about a few of those. And of course, very important for the medical school is we have 17 affiliated hospitals. And the picture that you're seeing here is the path leading toward the medical school, but what you can actually see on the right hand, actually it's away from the medical school, what you can see on the right-hand side are the two buildings that make up the Faculty of Life Sciences. A little bit more about the Sackler Faculty of Medicine. So we are Israel's largest medical research and training complex. We have both basic and translational research that's conducted both in laboratories in the Tel Aviv University campus, and that's at the, I think you can, not sure you can see the arrow, but this is the tall structure over here. And then we have clinical laboratories, as I said, that are situated in the hospitals with faculty that are affiliated to the faculty. Out of these, we have 120 preclinical PhD faculty, and actually, when I was described as Vice Dean, my role is actually Vice Dean of the preclinical faculty. So I'm in charge of anything that has to do with those faculty. And then we have, again, 1,400, 1,500, depending on the number that you quote, of clinical MD faculty. Now, the Faculty of Medicine, as I mentioned, of course, one of our primary goals is educating both graduate students and medical students. And let me tell you a little bit about that structure, because this, of course, is manifested in the research that we do. So the Faculty of Medicine is actually made up of a number of schools. The main school is the Sackler School of Medicine, and we have 3 different medical school programs there. The 6-year program, which is the conventional Israeli program, the 4-year program, and this is actually the first year that we're going to have graduates. This is modeled after an American program. And we have an actual American program. It's called the New York American program. Those that study in this program are mostly Americans and Canadians. It's conducted completely in English, and 99.9% of these students go back to the United States for their residency. Some go to Canada as well. We then have the Goldschlager School of Dental Medicine. Of course, our goal is to educate dentists. We have the School of Health Professions, and this is made up of a number of separate departments. We have nursing, physical therapy, occupational therapy, communication disorders. And it's important to mention these because in addition to educating all of the people who are going to be trained for these different professions, we of course have laboratories, and I'll describe to you some of the people that we've hired in these different departments in the past couple of years. Of course, we have a graduate school. We have over 1,000 graduate students in this school, both master's and PhD students, and that's really the bread and butter of our research laboratories. They're the ones who are doing most of the work. We have a School of Continuing Medical Education to ensure that our physicians continue being educated after they've gotten their medical degree. And last, but certainly not least, we have the School of Public Health, which is made up of a number of departments: disaster management, occupational health, promotion health, administration, and epidemiology. And as you can imagine, this school has become extremely popular in the last couple of years with the understanding that public health is becoming so crucial for our health and disease. And one, of course, the main advantages of being in a medical school, and this is whether you're a faculty or whether you're a student, is that we are directly affiliated with 17 medical centers. The very large ones, Sheba or Tel Shomer, the Rabin Medical Center, or Belinson, Suraski, or Ichilov, and then we have many other hospitals: Meir, Asaf Rofeh, Wolfson, Schneider, Bet Levinstein, psychiatric hospitals, geriatric rehabilitation centers, and community clinics. And the real advantage here, of course, is that we have a direct connection between the preclinical and the clinical research from the level of faculty as well as other people who are working in these labs. We, of course, it enables us, the faculty, to have interaction with surgeons, with pathologists, with geneticists, and more. As researchers, who are mostly PhDs, it gives us access to clinical data. And we just actually had a few weeks ago our annual research fair, which gives us the opportunity for both the preclinical and the clinical faculty to meet. We have posters, we have presentations, and it really gives us a wonderful opportunity to get to meet one another, since there are, of course, so many of us, and to see who we can collaborate with directly. Of course, our laboratories at Tel Aviv University are extremely fortunate to have excellent competitive funding. And I have to say that one of the questions that's often asked of me, are there advantages or disadvantages to being at a university? And I have to say that I've been extremely fortunate in the 18 years that I've been at Tel Aviv. I haven't had a 100% success rate, but it's come pretty close. And you can see the list, and this is just a partial list of the grant agencies that fund researchers at Tel Aviv University. Of course, the Israeli ones, the Israel Science Foundation, the U.S.-Israel Binational Science Foundation, the Israel Cancer Research Foundation, the Israel Ministry of Health, and then, of course, we have a number of international organizations and grant funding. Of course, our favorite these days is the ERC, because they're, as many of you know, are extremely large grants, and so it's been really very lucrative to get these grants. We also have grants from the NIH, and you do not have to be an American citizen to get these grants. I happen to be, but I don't even think that that's helped me. Instead, it's really good to be working on a project that you have some kind of a niche, something special in Israel that you can't get if you were in an American lab. And there's a lot more than I've named here. So let me tell you about the Sackler School of Medicine and the different departments that are composed in the school, where any of you might be looking for a faculty position depending on what your area of expertise is. So one of them is anatomy and anthropology. The second one is medical education. The third is cell and developmental biology. The fourth is human molecular genetics and biochemistry. The fifth is human microbiology, and there's a word here missing. It should say and immunology, very important. There's the Department of Pathology, and last but not least, in the School of Medicine, the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology. So let me tell you a little bit about these different departments. I'd have to say that there's a lot of overlap between the people who are sitting in cell and developmental biology and human molecular genetics and biochemistry. The people who are sitting in those departments could probably be, for the most part, in either department. The brain research or the neuroscience is done mostly in physiology and pharmacology. But again, there's overlap with other departments. So it's, you're really, depending on your topic, you're not really locked into one of these departments. What tends to determine these departments is what the faculty members in these departments teach. We then have, as I mentioned earlier, the School of Health Professions and the School of Public Health. And of course, if you're doing research in that particular area or your area of expertise in teaching, then you'd be in one of those schools and of course one of those departments that are situated in those schools. Physical location, if you're in the School of Medicine or if you're in the School of Public Health, then you'd be in the large building that you saw earlier. If you're in the School of Health Professions, it's in the School of Health Professions building that's one building over. And what's also not listed here, but is the School of Dental Medicine, and they also have their own building. So where are we? I think this is a view that's familiar to all of you. We're located, of course, in Tel Aviv, just north of the Yalkon. Many of the labs at the Sackler School of Medicine actually have a view of the Mediterranean, so it really is very lovely. Let me tell you a little bit more about some of the resources and some of the other centers and schools that we have at the university that we interact with. So first is the Sagol School of Neuroscience. This is a school that was started only a few years ago, and it's really been quite dramatic because it's the first school that actually has opened at Tel Aviv that's really been faculty. So there are 9 different faculties that are integrated in the Sagol School of Neuroscience: biology, medicine, psychology, physics, mathematics, linguistics, engineering, and computer science. And in fact, we had our annual retreat last week at Maleh Hamisha. It was a huge hit. And we really got a chance to see those who are, for example, I'm in medicine, to see what people in engineering, and we even have someone from the School of Management and Business who was dealing with decision making. So very exciting to see how much is really under brain research. This school has an interdisciplinary undergraduate and graduate program so that students would apply to the School of Neuroscience, and then they feed into the different laboratories, and of course including the laboratories at the School of Medicine. We also have, and this is part of the Faculty of Medicine, the Sackler Cellular and Molecular Imaging Center. This is a state-of-the-art facility with everything that you can imagine for world-class imaging. We have confocal microscopy, we have small animal molecular imaging, we have imaging analysis facility, and we also give 4 academic courses year-round, including practical courses. We carry out workshops for image analysis and imaging techniques. And the really nice part about this is we are now situated in a newly renovated building. We also have the Tau Center for Nanoscience and Nanotechnology. That's situated on the other side of campus, but our faculty are an integral part of this center. It's a multidisciplinary research and sustainable cooperation with industry and society. There are research from physics, chemistry, engineering, life sciences, mathematics, and medicine. And again, this really gives a very good opportunity to collaborate with investigators from these other faculties. There are laboratories of 6 core members at the center, as well as shared labs. And there are many technologies that are being developed, for example, in cancer detection, in theranostics, in biodegradable plastics, and more. The Center for Neuroscience and Nanotechnology also supports education programs and hosts visiting scientists. In June actually, we'll be holding a 1-week-long international course on campus. We also have the Edmund J. Safra Center for Bioinformatics, and this has really been quite remarkable because it's taken many labs who are working individually in bioinformatics and brought them together under one roof. And the scope of our activities is multifold. It includes computational genomics, structural bioinformatics, large-scale computations, and computational methods. There are 25 faculty members from computer science, from medicine, and life sciences who are part of this Center for Bioinformatics. We have 40 graduate fellowships a year, and over the years there's been a large number of publications. And it really came about because of a very generous donation from the Safra family, and we've been able to continue that funding accordingly. We have an interdisciplinary graduate program and, of course, space for computational infrastructure and software engineers. And more. So what I've mentioned up to now are a few of the centers of the schools that we're affiliated with and the resources that we have. So if you would have your lab at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine, you would have direct access to all of these. That also includes the Functional Genomics Laboratory. We have a brand new specific pathogen-free building for transgenic modeling of human disease. So of course this includes mice and rats and rabbits. We have a Cancer Biology Research Center. We have a brand new building that's going up. It should be ready in a few months. It's going to be our first completely green building for the Porter School for Environmental Studies. We have a Strauss Center for Computational Neuroimaging, both for now for mice, and there's going to be one for humans shortly. And we also are integrated, we have a number of faculty who are integrated in the Merkazei Metzianut, the I-Core for complex human disease, and for cognitive neuroscience. And of course, those faculty, those new investigators who've been fortunate enough to join those I-Cores have not only been part of an integral group of scientists, but have also had enhanced funding. Unfortunately, there aren't going to be any new ones, but those who are existing have been really wonderful. I should also mention Tau International, which is a group or a department at the university which integrates international students, both in the international programs that we have or international students who are coming. For example, this summer we have a summer program in biological and neurosciences, and all of those are international students, and they actually feed in through Tower International, which gives them a home and lots of resources for being foreigners, and it's been really wonderful as well. Okay, so that was background about the faculty, about the university. Are there any questions? Does anybody want to cut in and ask a question about those, or should I continue? Okay, silence at the other end. So I will continue. So feel free to cut in with your chats whenever you'd like.
Yeah, just a second, Karen. Everyone that if you have a question, please type it in the chat window, and then we'll see that you have a question, okay?
Okay, no chats yet. Okay, so I'm going to continue, if I may. So, advice for new faculty members. So what I want to do is go through the process at Tel Aviv University, but specifically I'm dealing with what happens at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine, and then give a couple of tips, and then hopefully you'll have some questions. Okay, first what I wanted to do was give you some testimonials. I want to tell you about some of the new faculty that we've hired. I think that particularly if you're coming to Tel Aviv and you want to find out what it's like to be a faculty member, the best thing is to ask the new faculty. You can ask me as well, but I think someone who's come in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of changes with startup packages, with resources, and you should talk to the people who you are closest in age to. So the person you have pictured here is Dr. Yuval Nir. He's a new investigator at the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology. He's also an I-Corps member in the I-Corps for Cognitive Science. And he's standing in front of one of his new contraptions. And what he said was, at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine, I was able to set up a dream lab for in vivo electrophysiology equipped with the best instruments that will allow our team to pursue cutting-edge research, create new discoveries, and compete with the world's best institutions. So that's Yuval smiling. Okay, here we have Dr. Eran Perlson. He's a new investigator at the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology. He came from the University of Pennsylvania after a postdoc, and he told me, the students at Tau are remarkable. Noga, from the Sagol School of Neuroscience, a PhD student, Shani, an MD PhD student, Eitan, a biophysics PhD student, are making primary motor cultures while I watch. Their diversity in background and interests contribute to the excellence in our research. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Netta Erez. She's a new investigator at the Department of Pathology, and she told me the other day, and you can see her pictured in her lab, establishing my lab at the Tau Sackler Faculty of Medicine allows me to combine state-of-the-art cancer research, mentoring excellent PhD and MD PhD students, and clinical collaborations, validating our research in the context of human cancer. As part of my involvement in the community, I am teaching a scientific soft skills course to graduate students in an effort to support the transition to become independent scientists. And I do encourage any of you who get the opportunity to hear this lecture. It's really fantastic. So let me tell you about more new faculty that we've had in recent years. Yankel Gabit is actually a PhD and a dentist. He came from the University of California, from the Keck School of Medicine, and he studies sexual dimorphism and skeleton remodeling. We have Oren Kobeler, who investigates viral genetic diversity. Tamar Geiger, we also know her as Tommy. She works in the proteomics of breast cancer, and she's managed to bring 2 proteomics mass specs and is doing remarkably well with those. Limor Landsman just joined us from the University of California, San Francisco, and she works on pancreatic development and function. And Dorit Carniella Miller is studying doctor-patient relationships, communication, and medical professionalism, and she's in the School of Medical in the Department of Medical Education. Michael Miliavsky joined Netta in the Department of Pathology. He works on the DNA damage response in leukemia. Ariel Muniz works on regulatory mechanisms in mucosal inflammation. Karmit Levy came from Harvard, and she works on microRNA and dicer and melanoma. And a very recent recruit is Chen Luxemburg from the Rockefeller, from Elaine Fuchs' lab, and he works on the mechanobiology of tissue development. And finally, we have Jason Friedman. He works on rehabilitation of grasping. He's in the Department of Physical Therapy. Sagol Portnoy is actually an engineer. I should mention that Jason is a computer scientist. Sagol Portnoy is an engineer working in motor rehabilitation in the Department of Occupational Therapy. Michal Itzhaki works on knowledge and perceptions of patients and caregivers. She's in the Department of Nursing. And Kitam Mukhsen is our newest recruit in the School of Public Health, and she works on Helicobacter pylori and their role in disease. She comes from the University of Maryland. So you can see we've gotten a really wonderful crew of young faculty in the past couple of years. This isn't all of them, but it is most of them. And the good news is I just had to take 2 of them off because they just got tenure and promotion to associate professors. So they get off of the new faculty list. That's the good news. Okay, so let me tell you about applying for a tenure-track faculty position. First, you go to BioBroad. That's the first thing I always say because that's where we advertise, and you can get all the information that you need there, not only, of course, for Sackler, but for most of the other institutions in Israel. We do have a pretty strict application due date. It changes each year depending on when the holidays is. Next fall, it will be October 31st. And we do that. I know that there are other places that don't have a strict deadline. We do that because we really would like to get all the applications in at once. We do have, as you know, a limited number of positions, and to a certain extent, we are comparing the applications one against the other, and it does make it much easier if we have all those applications at once. So I would encourage you, even if your last paper isn't in yet, to apply by the deadline. The process afterwards is very fluid. You can send updates a week, a month, 3 months later, if we're still considering the applications. It's been rare, but we have had people who have come in late because they said, oh, I didn't apply because I didn't know I could because I was waiting for my last paper. So you can certainly do that. And there have been cases, if we haven't gone too far down the road, we've been able to consider those. But we really do prefer that you apply by the deadline. The start date for these applications is October 1st, 2015, so it's about a year later. The requirements are listed, of course, on the application page. They include a CV, a research proposal, which should be a number of pages and should be very detailed. We want a teaching statement, and one thing that's very important to consider when you're writing your teaching statement is you should think about where you're applying to. Don't write that you can teach physics and engineering if you're giving an application for the medical school. You should go into the courses that we teach, and you should consider which of the courses that we teach would you be able to be part of. All of our faculty teach both medical school courses as well as graduate school courses. Now, the graduate school courses are usually ones that you come up with in your area of specialty. And that's, of course, a free-for-all. You have to apply, but for the most part, we rarely veto anything that anyone's ever wanted taught. The medical school courses, though, of course, tend to be more regimented. This is our bread and butter. Our medical students need to get an education in the medical school. So if you're going into the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology, if you're a pharmacologist or a structural biologist, you'll tend to teach pharmacology. If you're a neuroscientist doing electrophysiology, you'll tend to teach physiology. And so these are the kind of things that we discuss, of course, when you come for a job interview. But I do encourage you to, when you're writing your teaching statement, to think very much what you want to teach. And I should add that if you really don't want to teach a medical school course, then probably you shouldn't apply. Because, again, this is the type of teaching that we really do have to require, for better or worse. We do need 3 letters of recommendation. We do require your postdoc advisor, of course, to give a letter. And we strongly recommend that your PhD advisor should as well. One time we saw an application and there wasn't a letter from the PhD advisor, and I wrote to the candidate and I asked him why, and he said, well, he didn't want to burden his PhD advisor, so he kind of distributed, he had his PhD advisor write only some letters and not all of them. And I explain that, first of all, once somebody writes a letter for you, all they have to do is change the beginning. So that doesn't really matter. But we do want to know that you had a positive relationship with your PhD advisor, that you had a successful one, and that's all part of it. And usually, if you don't have a letter from your PhD advisor, it does raise a red flag. So I strongly encourage you to get a letter from your PhD and your postdoc advisor, and then, of course, a third person. It doesn't hurt to give a fourth. Okay, so what's required to get a position? I think most of this is pretty intuitive, but I will still mention them because we are a teaching and research institution. Of course, excellent in research is number one. We want you to come to Tel Aviv and get grants and write papers and mentor excellent students and, in short, be successful. And so the excellence is the primary criteria that we're looking for. Publications are very important. There's no question about it. And they're important because they do measure your success, your ability to be able to, I see there's a question, give me a moment, your ability to be able to present your data to the scientific community and successfully publish it is a sign of how you're going to do with your research. Now let me take a quick break here, and now I have to look to my left and see the question. So the question is from Alon Hirschhorn from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And the question is there any flexibility in the starting date and is teaching experience needed? Okay, so let me start with flexibility and starting date. We do prefer that people start October 1st, but we have had people who need to come in the spring, mostly people from Australia because their year is different or because of different considerations with kids or whatever. So we have been able to accommodate people to start April 1st, which is actually the second semester. We are quite inflexible, I should say, about starting any other date. And that's because of our semesters, not just with respect to teaching, because actually you usually don't teach the first year, but that's when our positions begin. That's when the salaries start. If people need to start earlier, for example, you got a position October 1st, 2015, but you need to come in September because you want to put your kids in daycare, and that happens quite a bit, then usually we can arrange to give you a postdoc fellowship until you would begin your position formally. So, there is some flexibility, and of course those are really the kind of details we can discuss if we get as far as having a job offer. Is teaching experience needed? No, it's not. I can tell you that I had no teaching experience. I did my PhD at the Weizmann Institute. I think you know that there isn't a lot of teaching there, and certainly not for the PhD students. And then I did my postdoc at the National Cancer Institute. There weren't even students there. It was all postdocs. I can't say that it helped me when I started at the university. It would have helped me some more, and I struggled for a couple of years. I think after 18 years, I think maybe I got the hang of it. But I have to say that when we've been considering candidates, it's been nice, but it was never a criteria of whether we accepted someone or not. So again, I think that having the experience is more beneficial for you. Believe me, you get on the job training, very good on the job training. Okay, so let me go back to my slide. It is very important to have a strong research plan and a vision for the future. We want to be able to see that you can see 2, 3, 5, maybe even 10 years ahead. Of course, things change. Funding considerations change. All of a sudden you have a great idea that was out of the box and you decide to make a turn and change your direction of research. So you're not locked into what we've hired you for. Of course, that's academic freedom. That's one of the beauties of coming to a university. But we want to see, at least when you're applying for a job, for a faculty position, that you do have a very strong idea of what you're going to be doing for a number of years. Teaching, of course, is essential. We are a university. That is our bread and butter. It's what pays our salary. But it really is one of the major functions that we have as faculty, is to educate the next generation. And because you're at a medical school, you would be responsible for teaching both medical students and, of course, graduate students. We do have some joint programs with the Faculty of Life Sciences, with the Sagol School of Neuroscience, so that you may also be teaching undergraduates, but that again depends on which department and which school you're in. Of course, the ability to mentor students is absolutely essential because your lab will be made up mostly of master's and PhD students. I've had in my lab in the past 18 years, I think I've had about 16 PhD students finish. I'm sorry, but I didn't look up how many master's students I've had, but at least that many, if not more. I almost always have a student who's doing Madei Yesod. I think most of you know that when you are a physician in Israel, during your residency, you're required to do 6 months research in a laboratory. Many of those MDs choose to do it in the hospital, but there's a fair number who decide to do it also in the basic research labs that are on campus. And I just had a really fabulous MD, an otolaryngologist, and she's finishing this week, and we just sent in her first paper. So that's a really good resource of students as well. I've had summer students, I've had rotation students from the Faculty of Life Sciences, I have MD PhD students, so there's really a very wide range of students. And these are really the workers, so to speak, in our laboratories. We have less senior researchers, and that's mostly because of funding issues, as well as postdocs. Very different than most of the labs, or many of the labs in the United States. It does take some adjusting, I think, when you move to Israel, but you quickly get used to it. And I think that the reason our students are so much in demand to go to the United States and Europe as postdocs, and you were all in that position a few years ago, is because we don't have many postdocs, and so we tend to give our, especially PhD students, a lot more responsibility. Of course, we want to have an idea that you'll be able to obtain competitive grants. It doesn't mean you need to come with grants. In fact, I'd say that 98% of our applicants have never gotten their own grant funding, but there are signs to be able to see whether someone looks like they can get their own competitive grant. Of course, you should be able to manage a team. That's what labs are all about. In the labs of having 1 or 2 students are long over, and many of the new labs are hiring up to 8 students in the first 2 or 3 years. And I just heard of a lab in the Faculty of Life Sciences with 25 students. A bit unusual, but it does happen. Something that we're also very interested in is whether you seem to have potential to contribute to the community. You know, we have lots of committees. We want some of you to be vice dean in the future, maybe even dean. And that's part of it. It's not a requirement, but of course, that's something that can be very helpful. Okay, let me see Vicky. Vicky, who is also the BioBroad Regional Manager from UCSF, asked what would be the teaching for the first few years. So actually, for the first year, we really make a huge effort not to have any teaching. Now, let me qualify that. I would have to say that in the School of Health Professions, they have a tendency to take new faculty to already start teaching then, because the ratio of students to faculty is very high. Very high, very low, very high. We have a lot of students in the School of Health Professions. We don't have a lot of faculty. And so we tend to put them in the first year. But someone like Vicky, who would be going to the Department of Pathology or Department of Cell and Developmental Biology, would not be teaching the first year. And in the second year, the teaching would start. It would probably start at about 2 to 4 hours and then could go up to about 6 hours. I can tell you all that officially we are all supposed to teach until we become full professors 8 hours a week, and then it goes down to 6 hours. I can also tell you that nobody, or very few people, if anyone in our faculty, actually teaches that much. But those are the kind of details you could discuss with the head of the department and the head of the search committee, Professor Ruth Chalgi, or myself, the vice dean, if and when that time comes, because it does depend on the department. I can tell you that there's more teaching in the Department of Anatomy than in Human Molecular Genetics and Biochemistry. But if you're doing anatomy research, I will give you a job offer now. If you're doing excellent anatomy research, we really need people in that field. Probably couldn't do the same for Human Molecular Genetics and Biochemistry. Okay, there's another question. Is there a comprehensive mentoring program for new faculty? So we have instituted a lot of changes in the past couple of years. First of all, we have a retreat for 2 days in Caesarea that happens in October, where you have an opportunity not only to meet all of the new faculty that have recently been hired, but you also can meet administrators and faculty who are involved in organization and administration and find out all the rules and regulations that can help you. We have each new faculty member is assigned both a scientific mentor and an administrative mentor to really help them go through the ropes. We also have a teaching education department that helps you learn how to teach. So we have what I would consider, yes, a comprehensive program. Okay, let's see. Could you please address during the application process? Okay. Requirements. Okay, so let me talk about relative. Okay, so the question from Dima Schwartzman from Boston is, could you please address the relative weight of the presented requirements during the application process? So I guess I need a clarification. Do you mean the CV versus teaching statement versus research plan, or the what is required list? So let me get an answer and then I can go back to answering that question. Okay, so let me talk about a couple of extra points for applying for a faculty position. First of all, I would strongly recommend to write to every institution and university. Don't wait for an ad. Not everyone is organized enough to put together an ad. I also want to emphasize that you should write to places also that you may not be considering going. One, because you all know that the competition is fierce and you might be the best candidate for a particular place, but there just won't be a position that year, but you really want to come back to Israel. So you might find that what seems a place that you wouldn't consider in theory, once the job offer comes, because the package might be so attractive and there might be a lot of pluses to that place and you didn't know it at all before you applied, you might decide to go there. So do keep your options way open. Also, I will tell you that it helps to get more than one offer. It does give you some leverage. Sometimes with a startup package, though not so much. Usually what's offered is what places have, particularly in our case. But people like to know that you were good enough to get several offers. That does help. When you're going to negotiate, and we'll get to that in a moment, do be polite and be realistic about the limits. This is Israel, and though things have changed a dramatic amount in the past couple of years, we still have limitations, and these limitations also change year to year. Do be formal regarding the application process. I think that this is a bit of a cultural issue, but I think that this is something that's quite important. I would also say to respect deadlines. Okay, let me go back to that question and the question about the relative weight and what's required. Let me go back to that slide. I would say that first and foremost is publication and a strong research plan. Now, the excellence in research is based on the research plan and the publications. So, and in some cases, that's also subjective, right? I would be looking at someone in anatomy, I would less be able to judge whether there's excellence in the research versus if I was looking at something in genetics. So that's why the criteria of publications becomes very important, because, of course, a faculty member is being chosen not just based on for someone from their own field, but also from outside of the field. Your willingness to teach is incredibly important. Of course, if you would come for an interview and say, I want to do this most spectacular research, but I'm not willing to teach, then it's more likely than not that there wouldn't be a job offer on the way. Okay, could you note research areas that are short in Israel or Tau? The question regards the questions that one might choose as a research project. That's a bit of a larger question, so if I may, Amir, I'm going to answer that a little later, okay? Okay, so let me go. I want to explain the process of getting an offer. So we have a search committee that meets. We have a representative from each department, as well as the dean and the vice dean, and then there's a chair of the search committee. We have 3 meetings. The first one, of course, evaluates all of the applications that we get, and then we make a decision to either write to the person that we're not interested, so no politely, but we don't think that we're the best place for you to apply. Please come back next year. We think your application is a bit premature, but next year we're very interested in you, but next year you'll be in better shape to do so, or we're going to invite you for an interview. The next step is, of course, a day of interview and meetings. I'll get back to that in the next slide. Then it would be a few months after that, or a few weeks, depending on when your interview and meetings are scheduled, would be notification of your position by the dean. Of course, during that time, there's many conversations with the vice dean and the candidate, with the head of the search committee, the head of the department, and other faculty. We try as much as we can for you to get to know about Sackler, particularly those of you who didn't study at Tel Aviv, by talking to new faculty members. We then would ask you to submit an equipment wish list, and that would be also something that we would do even before you get an offer. I think there must be some game or something going on because I have terrible background, so give me 1 second, I have to close my window. Thank you. Sorry about that, but I have some cheerleaders outside my window. Okay. Then we would negotiate the terms of the position, and then finally, of course, if all goes well, there'd be you accepting the position. Okay, let me tell you about the interview day. So first of all, how should you be funded? Unfortunately, at this stage, we aren't able to, when I talk about inviting you, we're not able to actually fund your coming to Israel. But as you know, the Bio Abroad and the ministry has funds that are available. You have to come to Israel and then get 3 signatures from places that you've interviewed. So that's a great help. Do plan to schedule all of your interviews around the same time, so a span of 10 days or 2 weeks that you could come to Israel. And you should give a full day at each place. I don't know what every place is doing, but certainly at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine, we'd like you to arrive around 9 or 10. You would have meetings throughout the day, either with investigators who are specifically interested in your research, also with members of the search committee, with new faculty so that you can get a lot of your questions answered. You would be giving your lecture. It's usually at about 12, 1 or 2 o'clock. We'd like to take you out to lunch, of course, and we'd like to give you the opportunity to visit some of the relevant facilities, for example, the Tabam or the animal facility, so that you could see what would be available to you if you came to Tel Aviv University. You should prepare your seminar with current research and plans for the future. That part is very important. Save at least 10 minutes at the end for plans for the future and be prepared to answer questions. You would, as I said, have meetings with senior and junior faculty throughout that day. One word of advice, please get over jet lag first. We've had some people come and they do apologize for having jet lag, but it's tough. It's tough for them and it's tough for the audience. And the people who are really jet lagged, they just don't have the opportunity to show themselves at the best. And so try to take a day or 2 off before you start on running speed on giving your talk. Okay, I have a question here. How long, this is from Nisan Issachar from Boston. How long does the application process usually take from applying to the final decision? Okay, so that tends to be quite dynamic, but I give it a ballpark of November, December, January, and February. We're usually giving our offers around, and I can tell you, how do I remember this? Because it usually corresponds with this annual meeting I have, and I'm usually abroad that week, which makes it sometimes easier to talk to people in the U.S. But so it's usually about those months. It is fairly fluid because we tend to give our first offers around the 3rd week and, plus minus, 2nd or 3rd week of February. We, of course, have some people who unfortunately tell us no. Doesn't happen too often. And so then we, of course, will have a next round. We did have a year where someone who had accepted the position then said no in the summer, and then we were able to go to the next runner-up. So it is fluid, and that's why I encourage you, if you have papers that are coming up during the year, that you should apply if you want to come the next October, but you should realize that you will be able to submit and update your applications throughout the interview process, because we are a committee. We do give very special attention to these applications, so we will look at applications as they come, not applications, but parts of the application as they come in. Okay. So Eyal Handel from the US has asked, how many positions do you offer each year? We offer between 2 to 6 positions a year. When I say 6, this includes the School of Health Professions, and they tend to not have heavy startup packages. Interestingly enough, it may not be a surprise to most of you that most of the difficulty with offering positions is not what we call tkanim, but it's actually because of the amount of the startup packages that we want to be able to provide so people can set up a new laboratory. And so the rate limiting step has tended to be, in the most recent years, the number of positions because of the startup packages. Of course, if you don't need any funding, if you're in medical education and you need an office and a computer, then of course we usually have more of those types of positions. Let me tell you what comes with your position long term, and I think this is a really important one when you're thinking of the pluses and minuses of staying in the US or Europe versus coming back to Israel. There are a lot of advantages to having a faculty position in Israel. First of all, your salary. It comes directly from the university. Once you get tenure, it's guaranteed for life, and then the pension isn't too bad either. You also get what's called Tosefet Aleph, which is a supplement from the grants, as well as a supplement from grants in the form of Tosefet Bet that comes from Vatat. There's also a stipend. I think it's about 260,000 shekels now that's given to new faculty that comes from the government through the university. In most cases, it depends on the area you're in, you would get, and this is for as long as you have, for pretty much the whole time you have a faculty position at Tel Aviv, 50% salary of a research assistant, or that would also is the equivalent of 100% postdoc fellowship. We don't guarantee that for life, but I've had one for almost 18 years. So it's usually, and if it's cut because of the budget in the university, the new faculty are the last ones to get that cut. We only had a few years while I was at Tel Aviv that we didn't have that, and that's been continuous now for the past 10 years. So that really is something that you can pretty much count up having with your position. You also get up to 5 PhD student tuition and fellowships, as well as masters. This is based on matching. Now, 100% fellowship is 60,000 shekels. The maximum allowed for a student is 200%. And we do require it to be based on matching because we want accountability. So the faculty contribution would be anywhere from 50 to 100% per student, and the PI contribution would be 50 to 75%. You can add more, of course, but there is a minimum that we require from the PI to have, so that you do need to have grants in order to be able to support your students. But this is really a great plus because you can have up to 5 of these students heavily matched throughout your position at Tel Aviv. Now, what comes with your position short term? There's a startup package, of course, which includes equipment, supplies, and the ability to renovate your lab. And some of those pictures you saw earlier are newly renovated labs. We give you moving expenses, and the amount depends on whether you're coming from California or from Europe or from the East Coast in the U.S. There are travel expenses for you and your entire family. Of course, the shortest route, you can't go through Hawaii. And there is short-term housing at the dorms if you arrive to Israel and you don't yet have an apartment and you need something short-term that you'd like to live in. Okay, so the last slide is a picture of the university, and now I'm going to hit the questions that we had. So the next question, okay, do you have available positions for associate professors? So we have positions for every different level, and so we have openings from all different stages of entry points. Now let me go back to a previous question that I had, and that was, Could you note research areas that are short in Israel or Tel Aviv? I'd have to say that that's really a hard question to answer, because I have to go back to that question. It really depends on, there's so many different areas. I would have to say, and I mentioned this earlier, we're short of people who are teaching anatomy. So if you are in an area that that requires anatomy and that kind of research, then again, we would take you very quickly because we're always short of people like that. I'd have to say that we have a lot of people who are applying in genomics, a lot of people who are applying in cell biology, and those tend to be the positions that we have less of simply because the competition is so high. But so that's, you know, it's kind of the question that I could talk to people individually about, but it would be a little harder to generalize. Okay, we have a question. Do we share information on candidates with the Faculty of Life Sciences? We do our best to. We certainly don't like to compete for the same faculty. We even had a year that we both wanted the same people, so they offered one a position and we offered the other. So we don't compete. We're a few hundred meters away from one another. And what we usually do is once we've gotten all our applications in and we've decided who we would like to interview, we actually talk to the Dean of the Faculty of Life Sciences and we exchange the list. We do both interviews. So if you've applied to both places, you would either do a joint day or a separate day at both places, but usually we won't both offer a position because the positions are so few and far between that we would really like to maximize the people that we'll be able to offer positions to at Tel Aviv University. Okay, I'm waiting on the chat now to see if there are any more questions. Okay. Okay, so if one just accepted a faculty position in TAL, what would be the first application you would want to apply for? Well, it really depends on when you got an offer. We had someone who got an offer in February and already said yes, and so he was able to make the March, I think, 25th deadline for the ERC. That's quite unusual to be able to get that together so quickly. Most of the applications for grants are in the fall. The ISF, the BSF, the GIF. And so, again, it really depends on the timing. I have mixed feelings about whether you've accepted a faculty position, whether you should already be applying for grants, because there is something to be said for spending all your energy while you're doing a postdoc on wrapping up everything you're doing as a postdoc. You know, once you get to Tel Aviv University, you're not thinking about your postdoc work anymore, you're thinking about Tel Aviv. So it really depends on your timing. If you can get all of that done and you can start with money, that's fantastic. Of course, we give you a startup package so that, and most people don't come with their own money in the beginning, that you can set up your new lab successfully for the first couple of years. What is the average amount of the startup package? Well, as I said, if you only need an office and computer, you know, it's like $20,000 to $30,000. But those of you who are asking probably would want more. Our startup packages are anywhere between $250,000. The highest we've given is $1.3 million. So it depends on your needs. I have to say it depends on the year. There are years that we choose to give more positions, and we do get one chunk of money, and so then we have to split it in more ways. There are other years that we simply have more money available to us, and we do try as much as we can to match the amount to the needs of the person who we want to hire. One of the things that we try very much to encourage is if we're giving a particularly large package, that it would include equipment that wouldn't be just used by the new faculty member, but it would be something that could go in the tzabam and could be shared by all. So the amount of startup package, again, really depends on the investigator, on the research they're doing, on the year that they're applying, on how many other candidates we have any given year. And I do want to add that the PhD students that you get based on matching, the research associate salary and of course your salary is completely separate from the startup package. That's of course continuous. We do give usually have the ability to provide one PhD student 100% for 2 years, but that really again depends on the year. Sometimes we can do a little better than that. Is there a preference towards basic versus translational research? No, there really isn't. We have people we have faculty who are working on C. elegans, very basic research, and we have those who are coming up with cancer therapy and have patents listed at Remote, our tech transfer company that's affiliated with Tel Aviv University. So we don't have a preference. We, of course, tend to be more inclined to be interested in research that has eventually some kind of medical application. But I truly believe that any basic research has some kind of eventual clinical or medical application. So we don't have a preference. What we want is really excellent research and successful research. Yes, the question is, are we interested in structural biologists? Yes, we are very interested in structural biologists. And in fact, we're making a very large effort now to increase our capacity in crystallography. We've just hired Yoni Hayton, who's at the University of Washington in Seattle, and he'll be doing a fair amount of crystallography. And of course, one of the reasons to absorb faculty in new areas is to improve and build the capacity at Tel Aviv for these different areas. Okay, so we are nearing 11 o'clock, and supposedly my time is up at 11, but if anybody has any more urgent questions, you can send over one more chat. I do encourage you to send me an email anytime. I would be more than happy to give you guidance, and it doesn't matter if you're coming to Tel Aviv or considering coming to Tel Aviv or going someplace else. Even if you're thinking about staying in the States, or you have questions, should you stay there, should you come back to Israel, I'll of course try to encourage you why you should come back to Israel. This is a spectacular place to do research. And of course there's the added benefits I don't have to tell all of you about, of family and friends. It's unsurpassed, not to mention being in Israel. So I would be really more than happy to share my experiences with you of how I've managed over the years in Israel. You can tell by my accent, I think many of you know I'm Canadian born, and actually Gil said that, and grew up in the United States, but chose to move to Israel. And so I'd really like to help all of you come back to Israel in whatever capacity you are able and you'd like to do so.
תודה רבה קרן, זה היה באמת אחד מהסמינרים הכי טובים שהיו לנו. ואני רוצה גם להודות לסיגל, שהיא עושה את כל התיאומים ואת כל האדמיניסטריישן של ביוברוד, ואופריישן שעשתה עבודה נהדרת. תודה לכולם, ואנחנו נשלח לכם הודעות לגבי הסמינרים הבאים. אז עוד פעם תודה רבה קרן.
Goodbye everyone, good luck.
ביי.